Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Through Conversations podcast, the platform dedicated to exploring the truth through conversations with the most brilliant minds. Today, I have a bonus episode for all of you, a bonus edition of the podcast. This is a solo edition, and it comes in a very timely moment in our nation's history in the United States. Moment in time, which is the third Republican presidential debate. Every single presidential debate inundates us with the same rhetoric. When I'm president, I will make our country the most prosperous nation in the world. All of the candidates tell us that. But more often than not, we never go deeper into the candidates' actual preferences or values, their policies. Even worse, we fail to distill how they develop their beliefs. In other words, we often accept the presidential candidate's talking points at face value and neglect to scrutinize their core ideals. Perhaps most importantly, we frequently fail to engage with one of the most critical civic duties in a democracy. For me, this meant that I had to thoroughly examine the books they read and recommended. One thing we can all agree on and we can relate to is that the books we read influence our perspective of the world. They shape our values, they shape our beliefs, and they shape the understanding we have of ourselves and of others. Here are some historical examples. Abraham Lincoln, the iconic American president, was an avid reader throughout his life, devouring both fiction and non-fiction works. Among his most cherished books was Shakespeare's plays, which he read multiple times. He drew inspiration from Shakespeare's characters and their struggles, often applying their lesson to his own political endeavors. Alan Turing, the pioneering computer scientist and mathematician. He credited the novel Alice's Adventures in Wonderland with sparking his interest in logic and problem solving. He reportedly found the story's structure and symbolism to be intellectually stimulating. Martin Luther King Jr., the iconic civil rights leader, he drew inspiration from My Experiments with Truth, written by Gandhi. King found in Gandhi's nonviolence philosophy a powerful tool for combating racial injustice. So, this question emerged for me. Why don't we investigate the books that have influenced the values, beliefs, and understanding of the people vying for the most consequential job in the world? As we prepare for the third Republican presidential debate, which will take place tonight, November 8th, we must ask ourselves, what books are the individuals bidding to become the most powerful people in the planet reading? There is no better moment to look beyond the speeches, beyond the talking points that the candidates will deliver and delve deep into the foundations of their beliefs, the books they read. In doing so, we can make a more informed decision while also gaining recommendations on books that have shaped the vision of our potential leaders. And we achieved 2 goals with just 1 stone. So in this video, you'll find a list of the books recommended by each candidate, along with a brief analysis of what this might signify for their principles as they vie for the most important job in the world. Let's do this. Let's start off with Nikki Haley. Her first book recommendation, Educated by Tara Westover. Nikki Haley once tweeted that this was an amazing book that shows the role culture plays in a person's life and the importance of an education. Ambassador Haley has expressed multiple times that an education is the foundation of a working democracy and of a healthy nation. And during her last presidential debate, she expressed her concern over the fact that up to 67% of 8th graders are not proficient in reading or math, and over 80% of 8th graders are not proficient in history or civics. Educated by Tara Westover is a tale of self-determination and resilience, as well as the challenges individuals face when pursuing an education. Ambassador Haley's recommendation here is handy to get a deeper understanding about the complexities of education, navigating family values, and setting our kids up for success through a meaningful educational journey. Everything Will Be Okay by Dana Perino is her second recommendation. Nikki Haley recommended this book in a tweet in 2021 and said that this is a must-read for young women everywhere. She even gifted this book to her daughter Rena as she was preparing to graduate from college and start her professional career. Ambassador Haley is the only woman that is seeking the highest office in the nation, and that in itself is a tale of determination, of grit, and of courageousness. Still, she recommends to all of us and to women to read Everything Will Be Okay, so they harness internal resilience, navigating a world where women are underrepresented in positions of leadership. Perhaps Dana's tale about how to take risks and understand the true power as women has given Ambassador Haley the drive and confidence to bid for the presidency of the United States. The third recommendation by Ambassador Haley is In the Path of Abraham by Jason Greenblatt. Nikki Haley said that the Abraham Accords were historic and will go down as an amazing legacy for a small group of people, including the author, Jason Greenblatt. Jason's work toward Middle East peace is remarkable, inspiring, and well worth reading about. As the world witnesses the potential collapse of stability in the Middle East, In the Path of Abraham can shed a light for all of us to see the work of the inner circle of former President Trump's administration on the Middle East, and their path to create the Abraham Accords. Jason Greenblatt offers an inside look into one of the most consequential periods in the history of the United States and Israel relations. He served working as the assistant to the President and Special Representative for international negotiations, and he served as the special envoy to the Middle East, where he is attributed as one of the chief architects of the Peace to Prosperity Plan between Israel and the Palestinians, and between Israel and its Arab neighbors. And when it comes to the Middle East policy, Ambassador Haley has made her position clear. The United States must do everything in its power to fully support Israel, and this book recommendation can help us read more into her thought process. Ambassador Haley recommended 2 more books which are featured in the link below in our newsletter. So go ahead, and if you're interested in reading more about her recommendations, click the link below in the show notes. Now let's move on to Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek Ramaswamy's first recommendation is Fossil Future: Why Global Human Flourishing Requires More Oil, Coal, and Natural Gas, Not Less. In one tweet, Vivek said that every American should read this book, because for him it was eye-opening and challenged a lot of his assumptions in a good way. The mainstream assumption that Vivek is talking about is that fossil fuels are a negative and the main driver of climate change. One of his presidential platform pillars includes the premise that, quote, the climate agenda is a lie. Fossil fuels are a requirement for human prosperity, end quote. Vivek believes that more people are actually dying due to climate change policies than the real consequences of climate change. Fossil Future, written by Alex Epstein, offers a glimpse into this counterintuitive position that Vivek is pushing hard during his bid for President of the United States. His second recommendation is Black Victim to Black Victor, identifying the ideologies, behavioral patterns, and cultural norms that encourage a victimhood complex. Vivek cited Adam Coleman in his book Nation of Victims, and he actually sat down with Adam for an interview, where they discuss Adam's trajectory and his journey from being a black victim to becoming a black victor. A big part of Vivek's campaign is that America must return to a philosophy that is primarily meritocratic, and one that is driven by the pursuit of excellence rather than the acceptance of victimhood. The third book recommended by Vivek Ramaswamy is The Managerial Revolution: What is Happening in the World. In one tweet, Vivek said that it may seem like the lesson for the next US president is to never, ever take a classified document out of the White House. But the real lesson is this: if you don't eliminate the managerial class, they will eliminate you. Biden, Trump, doesn't matter. They know who's in charge. End quote. Then one person asked in a following tweet if he could expand more on this idea, and he said that James Burnham had written a book a century ago about this. Burnham writes in 1941 that the world is moving to a reality where bureaucratic processes and managers rule the world. Vivek has made it clear that one of his priorities as president would be to, quote, dismantle managerial bureaucracy. The managerial revolution can shed a light into the principles that influence the perspective of Vivek on this issue. We have one more book recommendation by Vivek in our written version of this video using the link in the show notes. Now let's go with Ron DeSantis, Governor Ron DeSantis. And it is worth mentioning that Governor DeSantis did not explicitly recommend these books. However, they were extrapolated based on his book, The Courage to Be Free. He wrote about these books, in other words. The first book is Churchill, Walking with Destiny. Governor DeSantis starts his book, The Courage to Be Free, with a quote by Winston Churchill. Quote, "Courage is rightly considered the foremost of the virtues, for upon it all others depend." End quote. While this is not a direct recommendation by the governor who's bidding for the presidency of the United States, it is safe to say that Churchill has deeply influenced the way DeSantis sees the world and the role of leadership in it. Some news commentators have even mentioned that Governor DeSantis is channeling Churchill's spirit in his bid for presidency. The book, written by Andrew Roberts, offers an exclusive access to extensive new material, transcripts of war cabinet meetings, diaries, letters, and unpublished memoirs from Churchill's contemporaries. The second book recommended by Governor DeSantis is The Ruling Class. In his book, The Courage to Be Free, Governor DeSantis mentions an article written by Angelo Codevilla, where Codevilla describes the new, quote, ruling class of America. In the words of Governor DeSantis, Codevilla identified the source of America's political divisions and policy failures that have been driven by a ruling class that is, quote, ideological, incompetent, and self-interested, end quote. The ruling class will shed a light on the philosophy behind DeSantis' fight against what are considered as experts, such as Anthony Fauci and his fight against Faucism. The third book recommended by Governor DeSantis is The Vision of the Anointed Self, Congratulation as a Basis for Social Policy. Governor DeSantis writes in his book that Thomas Sowell identified how the nation is moving into a reality where narrative, not facts or results, drive policy, and hits a starking warning about building a nation that is built on the resistance of evidence, with policies that are, quote, fatally independent from reality, end quote. Governor DeSantis' platform, presidential platform, has been based on how, under his governorship in Florida, it remained open during the COVID pandemic. As he argues, he was ruling based on the evidence, not the narrative. The last book recommendation I will cover, there are a couple more book recommendations in the link in the show notes to an extended version of this video in essay form, is The People's Justice, Clarence Thomas and the Constitutional Stories That Define Him. In his book, Governor DeSantis praises Justice Clarence Thomas because although he was part of the, quote, ruling elite, given that he studied at Yale Law School, Thomas did not subscribe to the group's ideology, tastes, or attitudes. Governor DeSantis, who also studied at Yale Law School, takes pride in being an independent thinker and someone who is driven by his own values and not, quote, groupthink, end quote. He believes that this is a big reason why Florida stood as an antidote of America's failed ruling class. Now let's move on to Senator Tim Scott's recommendations. In just one video, Senator Scott, unlike the previous candidates, made my homework much easier. He gave an extensive recommendation on the books he has read, and they range from motivational to political, which I really appreciated. Senator Scott likes to read books that give him energy and that are derived from the gospel. And given that he's such a persuasive and great public speaker, we can certainly benefit from his recommendations, including myself doing these solo episodes. The first book is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Dale Carnegie's book is one of the most impactful of all time, and it is no surprise that Senator Scott has recommended it. This book reveals some ways to achieve any goal and to convince anyone of any idea we might have. And being a US Senator running for President of the United States, Scott would be a clear case study for Carnegie on the success of his techniques. The second book recommendation is Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell made quite the appearance in this book in the candidates' book recommendations. And this one by Senator Scott is a deep dive into the economics of Sowell. For Scott, an economy must be driven by capitalism and free enterprise, while Sowell writes a book on all the approaches of the economy that go from socialism to communism to feudalism. This book is a clear way of understanding the fundamentals of any economic system. The third book recommendation by Senator Scott is The Storm Before the Calm by George Friedman. Senator Scott gives us an interesting recommendation on the future of American society. Unlike the conventional idea that the calm precedes the storm, Friedman believes that American culture is passing through an existential crisis, an existential identity crisis, which is the storm, which will lead to the nation's most prosperous moments during the late 2020s and early 2030s, hopefully. Political divide, corruption, and social crisis will pave the way for the country's golden years, something Senator Scott looks forward to help to build on as he's bidding to become the President of the United States. We have a couple of more book recommendations by Senator Scott, which can be found using the link note for the extended version of this video in essay form. Now let's go to our last presidential candidate that qualified for this third presidential debate, Chris Christie. Just as with Governor DeSantis, these books were not a direct recommendation, but they were extrapolated from the books Governor Christie has written. The Conscience of a Conservative is his first book recommendation. In his book, Republican Rescue, Governor Christie said that Goldwater's story on how he was deciding to run for president hit close to home, quote unquote. The Conscience of a Conservative is a classic statement of conservative principles. Goldwater's book argues that conservatives should be proud of their beliefs and should not be afraid to stand up for them. And Christie may appreciate Goldwater's courage and conviction as he ran for president himself and faced many challenges uphill while defending what he calls, quote, root conservative principles, end quote. And Governor Christie seeks to run for a second presidential nomination, running through those same principles. The second book recommendation is And There Was Light, Abraham Lincoln and the American Struggle. This book is a biography of Abraham Lincoln, one of Christie's favorite presidents. Christie may admire Lincoln's strength and determination in the face of adversity, something he can relate to as he has been the only Republican candidate who is running a campaign mostly based on preventing Donald Trump from getting re-elected, which has made him a target for harsh criticism by Republican voters. The third and last book that we'll cover today is The Peacemaker, Ronald Reagan, the Cold War, and the World on the Brink. The Peacemaker is a biography of Ronald Reagan. Reagan was a charismatic leader who helped to end the Cold War. Christie may admire Reagan's ability to build consensus and to achieve his goals, while also being a persuasive voice and, quote, a principled Republican, end quote. We have a couple more recommendations, and hopefully you can read them in the link using, I know I've repeated this a lot during the video, but there are more recommendations if you're interested using the link in the show notes. Let me share with you my final thoughts as we're about to witness the third presidential debate. Now that we have a better picture of the software that our presidential candidates have installed in their brains, in their minds, we can get a better idea on the depth beneath their talking points during these presidential debates. This was an exhausting yet rewarding exercise of trying to understand from a first principle perspective how did the people bidding for the most consequential job in the United States arrive to the worldview. Which shoulders are they standing on? And what mental models have they adopted that will impact their fitness to serve our nation? For all of us nerds and book addicts, we just got a handful of great recommendations for our winter reading list. Thank you for watching. Let me know on the comments what you think about this video, about these solo episodes. about the book recommendations if you read any of these books, and your thoughts on the upcoming presidential debate, as well as the path towards the election in 2024. And also subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the show. I truly appreciate you joining the community and sharing with me your thoughts. And thank you for watching, and hope you enjoy it.